Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. I thought I would sit down and do another video for you guys and gals, and let me give you guys a bicep shot before we get started. Oh, Mount Bicephalus. And speaking of which, I thought it was funny. I had one of the guys who comments regularly, but I guess he's been a follower a long time, looked like a pretty jacked dude. He kind of joked and said, that's one reason I stick around for your channel. You know, besides the information, he's like, you will highlight your worst body part right there and do a bicep shot and just be totally cool about it. Exactly. Because we have to keep it real. And you know, the thing is, it's relatable to people. Not that I have small arms by any means, but compared to a lot of the influencers out there and a lot of bodybuilders, yeah, you know, my arms are going to be my worst body part. I think more tricep though than bicep. And we just accept that. We run with it. You know, have a good laugh and just be who we are, you know. Be who we are. Own it, accept it, and have some fun with it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about old school stuff, because people really enjoy these. They're like, I love it when you talk either the history of lifting way back in the day, or you talk about stuff from 20, 25 years ago, back when you were younger. You know, something I think is different with the training, because I've discussed a lot of the culture, right? The supportive environment, and you get people who comment, whether it's on the YouTubes or on the Facebook, people do chime in and comment. They're like, yeah, there was different back then. You're right. There was a camaraderie. There was community. There was community at gyms. You know, people knew you, right? And there were social circles and community, and you were almost like family at some gyms. You know, people treated you that way. But we had all that, and we had all the stuff where there was a lot of challenges and things, and I've discussed that. But what about training styles themselves? Training styles. Two things that really stand out. This was very different back then versus today. All right, we were coming off of the Dorian Yates era. Okay, the whole heavy duty, the whole hit thing that he had, the whole heavy duty blood and guts training. Keeping in mind, Dorian Yates won a bunch of Mr. Olympias, okay? Dorian Yates trained everything to failure, usually beyond failure. So think about 25 years ago, what was going on? It was the end of the 90s, right around the millennium. Dorian Yates had been putting out his training info for almost a decade. How do you think a lot of people trained? Everything was a failure, right? Because even you had people who used to quote Arnold, that it was all about getting to failure, to where that last rep that counts. That is how people trained. The idea that the reps in reserve wasn't really a thing. RPE, autoregulation wasn't really a thing. And you know what? And it worked. It worked. People tended to train to failure. The only exceptions would be lifts to where you could get stapled. Okay? Guys weren't doing squats and deadlifts to failure. They would just go really heavy. Or they would do breathing squats. So you would see, like I said, Widowmaker squats were a thing. They were definitely a thing down here in Texas where I was, because of all the high school football programs and all of that, which we're pretty famous for in the sports world. So those 20 rep breathing squats were a thing. So those weren't to failure, but they technically would have been past failure if there were not rest pauses. So we used to see a lot of Widowmakers, and people were still doing that old school thing to where they would do a Widowmaker squat and then do pullovers afterwards as a superset. That was very much still a thing that people were doing. But training to failure on most lifts was a thing with extended sets. So a lot of those older, they call them Weider intensity techniques. This was written about in all the magazines, all the books. This is how people trained. And it was normal. The normal gym rats, the people who were, you would see as the influencers today doing all this other stuff, that's what those people would have been doing. The people who were jacked and considered themselves serious tended to train to failure. And you had workout partners were not there to clap for you. Workout partners were there to help you do force reps and stuff, and that was normal. And I'm not saying people did tons of it, but like when you worked out with groups of people and dudes were benching, guys would be like, oh, it's our last set of bench. Let's put a bunch of 10-pound plates on and strip them down. And y'all, you think I'm kidding, but it would be like a rotation to where we would strip all the plates for one guy, like he would go almost to failure, help him rack it, strip a 10 off, do the same thing, right? And we would do like multiple drops. And sometimes get all the way down to the bar and then take it to failure. Load the 10s back on, the next guy would do it. Stuff was to failure. And then beyond, forced reps were normal. Whether it was curls, tries, guys would be helping each other do forced reps was normal. On cable press downs, dudes would be over there helping them get a couple more reps. Same thing, any sort of press with a dumbbell. It was once you reached failure, the other guys would tap up with the elbows at the bottom. Not this stuff where you see that with every rep like that. That's nonsense. But it would be when you got really close to failure, they would tap them up. They would help you do forced reps, and it would be 4 or 5 of them sometimes. Preacher curls, absolutely. We saw a lot of that, right? So any of those movements, you saw that stuff. Pull-ups, you would even see some of it, right? Cable rows, you would see guys even help a little. Lat pull downs, you'd see some of it there. So a lot of those things, it was normal. And then everyone did body part splits. Everyone, because again, we went from a change of era. We went from full body in the 50s and 60s to people doing body part splits. And then upper lowers became dominant again based upon some of the data, some of the strength world. And this is barring like the Russian squat programs and all this high frequency stuff in Bulgaria. And setting all that to the side in the strength world, most guys who were jacked trained on body part splits. And 3-day splits were not as uncommon as you would think because of the Minzer and the Dorian Yates influence. A lot of really jacked guys trained 3 days a week with low volumes on a split. But again, everything to failure. You'd see guys come in and do pause squats almost, or they sometimes would take them to failure. Pull-ups, chin-ups, weighted chin-ups to failure. Incline bench to failure, use spotters. And that's how guys trained. But they wouldn't do a lot. Some of them were literally only doing 5 or 6, 8 sets a week on a 3-day split was really, really common among some really jacked dudes. But so were forced reps. So were drop sets. Guys used to run the rack. So they would call it only 3 sets, but you would see that frequently. Things like lateral raises done on drop sets to failure. Dumbbell curls done running the rack to failure, to where you would just grab lighter dumbbells, okay, all the way till you got down to the 2.5s and reached failure. So we saw a lot of training like that, and everything was done on body part splits because they couldn't train a muscle more than once a week. They just couldn't. Because of the way that they were training, they were simply not recovered. And it worked. It worked. But that was the normal gym rat type training. That is what I saw at multiple gyms back in the day. Multiple gyms in multiple cities. So I feel like that is fairly representative of that era of training before the internet was really taking off with training stuff. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.